language lovers, it's Jessica with For the Love of Languages. We are on week 4 of the 52 Pickup Project, and this week's language is Portuguese. Portuguese is an Indo-European language of the Western Romance subdivision. It is the sole official language of Portugal, Brazil, Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Angola, and São Tomé and Príncipe. It also has co-official status in East Timor, Equatorial Guinea, and Macau. Portuguese is a widely spoken language with about 223 million native speakers and about 20 million second language speakers. The Portuguese that we'll be focusing on the most in this video segment is Brazilian Portuguese because about 205 million of those speakers come from Brazil. My initial interest in Portuguese happened when I was in high school and I met my friend Juliana, a foreign exchange student from Brazil. Aww. Since then, I've been learning by taking community classes and using books and various apps such as Duolingo, Memrise, Mondly, and Mango Languages. When scheduling no longer permitted me to attend the classes, I went to Italki to find a tutor for private lessons. That's where I found Helen, a community tutor in Brazilian Portuguese. In case any of my viewers are interested in learning the language, I thought it might be a good idea to ask a native speaker and teacher to shed a little bit of light on the subject.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm here with Ellen and she's a teacher on Italki and she has actually taught me before and I'm slowly continuing to learn Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. So we're going to talk to her just a little bit about her online teaching. So Ellen, how long have you been teaching online?
Oh, it have been around 2 years.
Okay, and where are most of your students from?
Oh, they most from United States, but I have students from like the whole world, from Japan, China, Colombia, or Europe. It's
okay.
A lot of places.
And the students that aren't from the United States, do you do your lessons for the beginners? Do you give your instruction in English?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Actually, for the whole another students, because it's the thing that we have to communicate when the person doesn't speak Portuguese yet.
Okay. And what levels of students and what ages of students are you currently teaching?
Actually, I have the all ages and all levels because I have kids, I have teenagers, I have adults, and I also have like a person who doesn't speak Portuguese even a little bit, but I have a person who speaks okay and the person who speaks better than me.
So you have a really huge range of abilities there.
Yeah.
And how? So that means you have to be really flexible. How do you teach a child? So if you have a child coming to his or her first lesson, what do you usually do?
Yeah, I actually let this a little bit for the parent. I want to have a conversation with him before or with her, right? But I try to make the class more fun. I absolutely will talk in a different way. It will be different as the way that I talk with you or another person because they need more energy and more effort. And I have to use more things to be entertained. As like yesterday, I use this for a student, and we are talking about numbers. So it's not just numbers; it's fish with numbers.
Okay. So
Okay.
cute, entertaining props.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to. Whoops.
And how about teens? That can be a tough age to teach. And I know this from teaching piano, just because likes change or I guess attitudes change a little bit. How do you go about teaching a teenager?
Yeah, it's like I don't have a lot of teenagers, but I think I used to think that I was this person before.
Uh-huh.
So I, as almost the same as a kid, like we can conversate about everything. I want they trust on me
Oh,
because in this part of life, it's good to have one more person that you can trust and you can tell and they can like help you in anything, just not in Portuguese but in their life.
yeah, that's important too. And then adults, are most of your students adults?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and do most of your adult students come to you as beginners, or a majority of them do they already have a foundation in Portuguese?
Yeah, I guess I have like half and half. Like half of the students it is like beginner and half it's not. They can have a conversation.
Okay, and how do you start off a beginner? What's a typical first lesson like for somebody that's just coming in and
hmm
they're like, I don't know anything, I'm ready.
Yeah, okay.
Do.
So to get start, like we start from a beginner conversation, it's just introduce the greetings. So, hi, how are you? I'm good. I'm not good. Good morning. Goodbye. This kind of stuff. Just to introduce yourself, to know how to introduce yourself for another person's.
And how about with an intermediate student? If somebody comes to you that's been studying, what's the first thing that you do in your first lesson with them?
Okay, it's more common in in the platform that this kind of students just come to the class to talk because I believe the talk it's the most way more easiest to get fluent in a language because you talk and if it's not going well I will say and then we will correct so we'll be really more like easygoing. Do you know?
Yeah, yeah, and just learning within the context of the conversation.
Exactly.
And same thing with advanced, or
Yeah,
do
yeah,
you
the
use
same.
like articles or let the student pick the conversation topic? How do you find things to talk about to
Yeah,
keep building up?
yeah, of course. It's like sometimes if the students want this kind of stuff, because some students just don't. They don't like homework. They don't like to read something. They just want to talk. But this kind of students who want to, how can I say, to to make exercises and talk about something specific, I like to use the TED topics. They have a list from
Right.
A to Z, so I send to them to choose some topics just to know what they like more, just to not get in some place they don't. So it's this, but I also use some books to teach grammatics stuff. Like we are talking,
Mhm.
and then I see that you don't get something, and then I will go to a book and to make exercises with you. So it's like we do a lot of stuff. Uh, doesn't exist a student who is the same. So I have always to change my class. It's not always for students. Okay.
So let's talk a little bit more about the beginning student because I think some of the people that may be watching these videos, they're trying to decide whether they're wanting to study these languages that we're talking about in the project.
Yeah.
So a lot of people want to know, how long is it going to take me to be able to say something or be effective in
Yeah.
this language? So for a person who's just getting started, when do you really start to see fluency after how much time, assuming that they're coming to class or online class, maybe twice a week? Is that what your students usually do?
Yeah.
About
Mm-hmm.
twice.
When they are beginners and want to put more effort on it,
Mhm.
I also advise them to get like two classes per week because sometimes one it's not enough, but two it's good.
Uh-huh. And then I guess assuming that they're doing some things on their own to propel that, forward.
Exactly. It's
Do you
like
think
it's not on me. They have to put effort like alone and study alone and make some homeworks if I gave them. So you have to put effort on it if you want to get more fluent, like more fast than you can. But if it's not like I don't need this right now, so I can do it like on my time, it's okay. But if you want to get this fast, you have to put more effort on it. But I have students who study like for 2 months, even weeks, and they can communicate like really good.
Oh, that's great. I know that's
Yeah.
a really hard question to answer because there's so many things that factor into
Mm-hmm.
your ability
Exactly.
to like maybe previous language study and what that previous language study was and native language and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see where, a person who's highly motivated could really achieve that. Um, let's see. Could you tell us maybe an interesting historical or cultural note about Brazilian Portuguese that might be interesting?
Let me see. Oh, okay. So I have something that it's not specific to Portuguese, but for more languages. Okay, so
Okay.
I will type for you the words that if you just ignore the accents will be the same in 6 languages.
Okay.
Okay, so will be album, hotel, libido, sauna, mafia, and virus. This will be the same in Portuguese, English, French, Spanish, Italian, and German.
Okay. So it was French, English, Spanish, Italian, and
And
German. So
German,
was
yeah,
that five languages? So four of those being Romance languages and the other one not.
yeah.
Okay.
So it's like in Portuguese we have some accents to put
Mhm.
more force in the syllable, but in another's it's like just to be more global. If you take this out, will be the same in the 6 languages.
Okay. So those are loan words then.
Yeah.
Okay. And then how about something fun like slang? Is there any over here I think I recently saw a YouTube video with teens quizzing their parents on slang of
Okay.
today. Is there any fun slang that you want to share that might be fun to kind of throw into conversation when you're learning?
Okay, so we are enter in a place that it's tough to talk about because in Brazil, I used to say that in Brazil there's a lot of Brazils because it's different to me and different for a person who lives in the south or who lives in the north. So I will say something about my place. Okay, so in English, to say something that it's going, we use eng, right? Okay. In Portuguese, we do this with 3 variations. We have ando, endo, indo. Okay, but in my place, we used to ignore one letter of this. So in the opposite, to say like eating, that will be comendo in Portuguese. I will not say comendo. I will say comendo. I will eat the D.
Okay.
Okay, so it's led to talk faster, but this it's a thing. I guess I believe It happens like in the whole Brazil, even in the world. Like if we can talk more fast, we will do. Okay,
Oh
we've
yeah,
got
like
words to do this.
going to, we say gonna and wanna,
Yeah,
and
just to
the two.
short.
Yeah. Um, and then as for Brazilian Portuguese, why do you feel like that's important for people to learn? What's your feel? What are your feelings on that?
That's tough because like in the world that we
Mhm.
live, they care about more English because like it's universal. But in Brazil, there's a lot of things that we have that it doesn't exist in another part of the world. So if you want to come there, oh, actually come here, you will need this language because we don't actually know like a lot of English. We can try. We are so receptive and so joyful to help a person who doesn't speak Portuguese, but we don't talk like really good English. But if you have a Portuguese, it will be amazing to come here and get known this country.
Yeah, it's one of my good childhood friends is from Brazil, and she has to come, and I haven't been able to yet, but it's something that I'm looking forward to. Okay, finally, what do you love the most about your language?
Ooh, I like that I can communicate in my way, and another places can communicate in their way, and we are so different being in the same place. It's
Uh,
like I have another curiosity for you. It's like we have like a vegetable, I guess. I guess it is a vegetable. Okay. I don't know the name in English. I don't know if it does exist like in America, but we have three variations of the name just around the regions that we have in Brazil. So we have mandioca, aipim, macaxeira. To me, will be mandioca, but a person who lives in the north will be macaxeira, but I guess a person who lives in the south will be aipim. So it's the same thing, but it does have different names for the same thing. So I really think that it's really cool and it's actually funny.
Living in the same country, but having
Yes.
these different words. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have quite a few of those here, not with vegetables that I can think of, but it is funny to be like, oh, you call that this, and you call.
Hmm. That's new to me.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much. Thank you so much
You're
for talking
welcome,
to me
Jessica.
and giving your point of view as a native speaker. I appreciate it.
Sure. No, you're welcome. Feel free anytime to talk again.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm gonna stop.
One of the best and most useful resources that I've found is a YouTube channel for Spanish and Portuguese called Professor Jason. I was lucky to get to talk to Jason Jolley about his channel and the content that he chooses and what he's noticed that students need in order to succeed in the language. One of my favorites is his Jump Start Brazilian Portuguese, which has a lot of videos and grammar tutorials with easily digestible bits of information that you can start using right away.
So I'm here today with Jason Jolley, who has a very successful YouTube channel called Professor Jason, which features tutorials in Spanish and Portuguese. And since today we're talking about Brazilian Portuguese, it's so nice to have you to explain some of the ins and outs of it and tell us a little bit about what you put into your channel. Do you mind telling a little bit about your background with Brazilian Portuguese?
Sure. I spoke Spanish before I started learning Portuguese. In fact, I was doing a master's degree in Spanish. I wanted to become a university professor. And one of the requirements was that we had to, in addition to Spanish and English, learn another language. So I picked Portuguese, just thinking it'd be the easiest. It's similar to Spanish. And so I took an intensive course during my master's. During my PhD coursework in Spanish, I took another couple of classes. And then after that, I just kind of practiced on and off online. You know, I'd go into chat rooms and things like that, and studied using books and watched TV, listened to music. I got into a Brazilian music phase, and ended up meeting my wife online, and she's from Brazil, and we got married about, I better get this right, about 12 years ago, about when I started the channel. So yeah, since then it's daily practice.
Okay, so the channel is about 12 years old, and which one came first? Did you start posting Spanish and Portuguese tutorials at the same time, or was one of them before the other?
I definitely rolled out Spanish first. I don't think I wasn't that confident in my Portuguese. Right around that time, 2006, 2007 was when I was sort of practicing more online with my fiance, with my wife, and so I wasn't that confident in my Portuguese, and I've learned a lot since then. So it's probably a few years after I started the channel in 2007 that I started adding Portuguese videos.
Okay, and for Portuguese, which one of your videos can you tell gets the most views?
Well, I've started a new series, Jump Start Your Brazilian Portuguese, that's going to have about 25, 26 videos, and the first video in that series, so Jump Start Brazilian Portuguese, first video, which is the alphabet and pronunciation, that gets the most views. And my alphabet video in Spanish is also very popular. So I think people get really excited at the beginning. They want to learn the alphabet, they want to hear some pronunciation, and then it kind of tapers off after that.
Okay, yeah, I found that one to be really, really helpful. I like the jump start. That was there's a lot of information for people to just jump right in there and get started, even before they either start a class or go with an online teacher. There's so much there to really take in. Do you get specific requests for videos, or do people email you and say, hey, can you show more of this? Or
yeah, you get all kinds of requests. I probably get 5 or 6 messages on YouTube every day. Some days a little more, some days a little less. And they're all over the place. It's whatever's interesting to that person. It could be pronunciation. Typically they're very specific things. How do I say this? Or could you do a video on this specific advanced grammar point? So I usually just kind of ignore those suggestions because I'm on kind of a program, a schedule that I'm trying to roll out this series. And so yeah, but there's no pattern. The requests are all over the place in Spanish and Portuguese.
Oh, okay. And what about for native English speakers? Do you find that, and since most of the people that are probably watching these videos in this project that I'm doing are native English speakers, do you think those that have a Spanish background, do they do better in starting out, and vice versa? Those that have a Portuguese background, do they do well in Spanish? Does it work equally the same way?
Yeah, I think so. There's something that applied linguist study that's called cross-linguistic influence, and it has to do with how languages relate to each other for any particular speaker. And so obviously Spanish and Portuguese are very similar. They're both Romance languages. Spain is right next to Portugal, so they evolved in much the same way. So there is a lot of what they call positive transfer. If somebody speaks Spanish as their second language, that makes it easy for them to pick up, or easier for them to pick up Portuguese, and vice versa. And then sometimes the similarity of the two languages can also lead to confusion, right? Because some things you would expect to be the same but aren't the same. But I think overall, yes, absolutely. Speaking Spanish will help you with Portuguese, or speaking Portuguese will help you with Spanish.
And what do you think are some of the common pitfalls that students experience at different levels? Like, is there something that beginners really get hung up on, and then something in the intermediate level, and then something in the advanced level that you could tell us about?
Again, I think it's related to the previous question about how Spanish and Portuguese are similar. I think in the beginning, a lot of people learning Portuguese, especially if they already speak Spanish, there will be a lot of interference, and they'll rely a lot on the Spanish, verb system, for example, the morphology and syntax of Spanish, even the pronunciation, and that comes through and can cause little mistakes here and there. As they progress and they start to notice those differences and get better at switching into Brazilian Portuguese mode, there is something with pronunciation you might have come across, and that's, I think the pronunciation, the phonetic system of Portuguese is more complex than Spanish. They have more vowels, they have nasal sounds.
Yes.
And so that can be tricky to pick up for even intermediate and advanced. Portuguese has something called open and closed vowels that Spanish doesn't have, and it's very hard to predict if you're learning Portuguese as a second language where those are. And as you get more and more advanced, it's just the typical things, prepositions, the subjunctive, and things like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know I struggled in the beginning, and I still do with the nasal sounds. That was difficult for me. And then also some of the letters, like the R and the D, were a bit confusing for me at first when I got started. Okay, another question I think that I see all over the internet is, should I learn European Portuguese or should I learn Brazilian Portuguese? And I guess the best answer might be, well, what are you planning to do with it? But I think a lot of people, especially if they're like me, that want to get the most mileage out of their investment, they want to know if their Brazilian Portuguese will work if they go to Portugal and vice versa. And what do you think? Is that something that it takes an advanced speaker to be able to pull that off, or no?
No, I usually tell people, like you said in the beginning of your question, it kind of depends what you want to do. If you're more interested in going to Europe, to Portugal, obviously lean in that direction. But it's kind of like the difference between American English and British English. Yes, there are some noticeable pronunciation features, vocabulary, slang expressions, but people in Portugal can understand Brazilian Portuguese for sure. And so if it were me, and here's where I upset 10.3 million Portuguese people, if it were me, I would learn Brazilian Portuguese because there's 210 million Brazilians, and Brazilian Portuguese, that particular variant, is understood all over the world, especially because of the influence of like Brazilian media, soap operas,
Yeah.
soccer stars, all kinds of things like that. And so if I had to pick, I would probably focus on, that's why I do on my channel, focus on Brazilian Portuguese. But even if you learn the continental European variety of Portuguese, you're going to be understood anywhere as well. So it's kind of a non-issue, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And how about some unique features of it of Brazilian Portuguese, maybe as opposed to European or all of the Romance languages? Is there something that really sticks out?
When it comes to differences between Brazilian Portuguese and Portuguese from Portugal, and those terms are even a little bit controversial because people in Portugal don't like to hear that there's a Brazilian Portuguese. It's just Portuguese. But
oh, okay.
but there is a variant called Brazilian Portuguese, I think. And so one of the big differences is in Brazil, in most regions of Brazil, they only conjugate the verb in 4 different forms. So you have the first person singular, right? And then the form for the third person singular and second person, in Brazil they use você, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the same verb form as the forms for he, she, right? And then they have a first person plural, the we form, and then the second person plural, right? They form. And so there's only those 4 forms, whereas in Portugal, they have 6 forms, just like in Spanish from Spain. So that's one difference. In a sense, it simplifies the verb system in Brazil. It's much easier to learn, faster. Also versus other Romance languages, for like Spanish, for example, Portuguese still has a future subjunctive, and Spanish does not have a future subjunctive. They just use the present subjunctive when referring to something outside of the speaker's experience in the future. Portuguese, Brazilian, and European have a future subjunctive. And then also something that's different about Portuguese versus Spanish, for example, and some other Romance languages is that there are forms of the infinitive verb, the unconjugated form, where they add, sorry about that, where they add endings for person to mark person. It's called the personal infinitive. So there are some differences between Portuguese and other Romance languages, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to throw this one at you for fun. I've heard this before, and I've noticed this myself, and the question is, why does Portuguese or Brazilian Portuguese sound like Russian? Have you ever heard that?
I have heard that actually as well. And I actually had an experience where I was with a native speaker of Brazilian Portuguese, but we were here in the States, and she was saying something in English where I think we were at a department store or something like that. And the person asked her, after hearing her in English, if she was Russian. And so even her accent in English to him evoked that idea of a Russian person speaking English. So I'm not really sure what that's about. I don't know if it's just the overall kind of distribution of vowels and consonants is just kind of evokes Russian as well for some people. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer, but it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, I wanted to ask another non-native speaker, because I had asked some native speakers and they had no idea what I was talking about. So I guess it's kind of like you can't see your own eyeball, you know. So, okay, and then do you actually, I wanted to know, have you come across any unique reasons for students learning Portuguese? Have you ever had somebody say, oh, I need to learn Portuguese for this reason that didn't have to do with like work or travel?
Yes. Most of the time people don't share their reasons with me why they're learning. Actually, my most common question on my YouTube channel for Brazilian Portuguese is, what's that song at the beginning of your videos? I get that question at least 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah, I like that song. Is it Alexandre Pires? Is it from one of his albums?
No, it's not. It's close. It's from Gilberto Gil. And
okay.
Yeah. And so, but that's a very common, just random question you would ask about the language. But people don't often tell me why. I do get a fair number who do, when they do tell me, it has to do with, I've met my boyfriend, my girlfriend is from Brazil, and I want to communicate better with him or with her. So that's a fairly, it's not unique, it's a fairly common one. When they do share, often it's because they're in a relationship.
Okay. And what reasons would you encourage a person to learn Brazilian Portuguese? If they have so many to choose from, maybe they need a foreign language credit, and that's kind of on the list of possibilities. What would you say to convince somebody that that's a good one?
Well, first of all, again, going back to your question about the similarities, I would say if you already speak a Romance language like French, Italian, Spanish, it's going to be easier for you to pick up, right? But also, I think Brazilian Portuguese is very useful in the real world of business, commerce, trade. Overall, in terms of total speakers, it's the 9th most spoken language in the world. And if you look just at native speakers, it's number 6. So that puts Portuguese ahead of Japanese, French, German, in terms of a world language, native speakers. Also, Brazil has the 9th largest economy in the world, and it's a major player in global trade. And I just think, you know, for tourism reasons as well, if you like beaches, if you like great food, beautiful scenery, both Brazil and Portugal are great places to go. So there's lots of good reasons to learn Portuguese.
Nice. And do you have any tips for the beginning student who's trying to juggle grammar and vocabulary? Is there like a hierarchy of things that you need to learn to get started, or is it okay to just jump into it and start working on everything all at once? What are your recommendations?
That's a complicated question. I mean, it has to do with how languages are acquired or learned. And I've been doing this long enough to know what I don't know. I'm not an applied linguist, but I am a language teacher. And I think, yeah, you have to go with what you're interested in. I mean, if you want to learn just basic conversational phrases versus more academic Brazilian Portuguese, you're going to approach your language learning differently. But I think you have to, it's always helpful to learn language in context. So in addition to people like to use flashcards or language learning apps and things like that, I think it's important to try to use the language in real interactions, in conversations, even if they're simple. And then it's also good not to try to learn these words and grammar structures just in isolation, like, for example, okay, today I'm going to focus on verb endings in the present tense. I think it's important to try to learn those, view those, listen to those in context. So I like to recommend lots of reading, lots of viewing and listening. For me, music was really helpful because if you're not afraid to sing along, I like to sing in the car, you pick up that vocabulary, you're hearing it in context, it helps with your pronunciation, and also at the same time you're hearing grammar structures being repeated. So I really recommend listening to music, but also singing so that you're practicing your pronunciation.
Absolutely. And my final question for you is, what do you love the most about Brazilian Portuguese?
For me, probably it's the same thing I like about learning any other language, and that's it allows you to connect person to person in their own language and understand their perspective. Something that you're not going to ever accomplish, for example, with a translation app, although those are getting more and more sophisticated. When you can really communicate one-on-one with a person in their own language without any kind of mediation between the two of you, even if you're not fluent or proficient, that's the best, I think. When it comes to Brazilian Portuguese, I just like how creative Brazilians are. There's a lot of really cool, fun slang expressions, and your viewers can find those, on YouTube. There are tons of videos that talk about the slang expressions, or gírias they're called in Brazilian Portuguese. So there's a lot. Every language has a lot, but I think Brazilians are incredibly creative, and it's always evolving. And because there are so many different, Brazil's a massive country, the 5th largest country in the world, and so just like here in the United States, there are different regions and they all have their own slang. So I think probably the informal, ever-changing nature of Brazilian Portuguese is my favorite feature of it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to answer these questions that a lot of people want to know. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. It was a pleasure to talk to you, Jessica. And I wish your viewers good luck with whatever language they happen to be learning.
Thanks.
And that concludes our segment on Portuguese. Is it the language for you? With so many resources, teachers, and native speakers ready to talk to you, there's no reason why you can't get a good start. Come back next week when we find out what our Week 5 language is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Until next time,